They told you knowledge lives in books, that truth comes from institutions, that memory starts the day you're born. But what if the greatest truths, the ones that define your soul, were never written down, because they were never meant to be taught? They were meant to be remembered. There's a reason you feel it, that pull towards something ancient, that ache you can't explain, like you're living a story that started long before you arrived. But if you want to know what that story is, you have to go deeper than anyone ever told you was safe. Why do some people remember past lives before they can write their name? Why do dreams sometimes feel more real than waking life? Why do certain people feel familiar the moment you meet them? And who decided that was all just your imagination? Stay with this, because in the next few minutes, you'll understand why they buried this knowledge and why your soul is starting to remember it anyway. This is not a fantasy. This is the blueprint, the one they never wanted you to access. Before you were born, the story had already begun. Not the story you were told in classrooms or the one recorded in your family's history, but the deeper one, the one written in silence, in vibration, in memory too vast for words. They call it the Akashic Records, but it's not a library with shelves, and it's not guarded by cloaked beings with scrolls. It's a field, a resonance, a living frequency that holds every choice, every emotion, every intention your soul has ever carried. It's not a metaphor, it's not a fantasy, and it's not reserved for the enlightened elite. This field, this record, is as close to you as your next breath. It doesn't require you to study it. It simply waits for you to remember. You see, you've been in contact with it already. When a dream felt more real than waking life, when you met someone new but felt like you've known them for centuries, when a place you've never been moved you to tears. That was the record brushing up against your conscious mind asking, do you remember? In ancient Sanskrit, the word Akasha means ether, the fifth element, the subtle substance from which all things arise. The ancients didn't just believe in this field, they navigated it. They passed down techniques, not to teach you something new, but to help you reconnect with what your soul has always known. Modern science is only beginning to touch the edges of what these mystics accessed thousands of years ago. Quantum physicists now describe reality as a field of interconnected energy and information. They're catching up, slowly. But your soul, it never fell behind. It's already tuned to that station. You just forgot how to listen. This is not about becoming something. It's about remembering what you already are. The Akashic field doesn't judge. It doesn't punish. It reflects. Every thought, every act, every heartbreak, it all leaves a ripple. And those ripples don't disappear. They're stored, not to trap you, but to offer you a map of patterns, of loops, of soul agreements you made long before you arrived in this life. This is the book that remembers you, not the version you perform for the world, but the real you, the one behind the eyes, the one who's been here again and again, evolving, forgetting, and returning. And here's the secret they never wanted you to know. You don't need to earn your way back to it. You don't need to chant the right words or follow some sacred protocol. All you need is stillness, presence, sincerity. The field responds not to credentials, but to coherence. You've always had the key. You just forgot where you hid it. But the record didn't forget you. It never does. There's a reason the idea of past lives doesn't feel foreign to you. A reason the words "you've been here before" don't confuse you. They comfort you, like a soft whisper from somewhere deeper than thought. The memory doesn't come through logic. It comes through sensation. Through the quiet, knowing that pulses beneath the noise of daily life. You were taught to believe that life begins with birth and ends with death. That memory belongs to the brain. That intuition is just coincidence. But beneath those teachings is an older language. One your soul never stopped speaking. The Akashic Records are not a dusty archive in the sky. They are an energetic mirror, a living field that reflects every thought, every emotion, every intention you've ever carried across lifetimes. They don't remember like a library. They remember like a vibration. And that vibration hums quietly beneath your waking life. Sometimes it comes as déjà vu. Other times as dreams that feel more real than your reality. Or an unexplainable fear. A magnetic draw towards someone you just met. A talent you never studied but somehow already knew. These are not flukes. These are fragments, the surface of a much deeper sea. When you feel pulled to sacred texts, to ancient ruins, to philosophies you've never been taught, it's not curiosity, it's recognition. Because truth doesn't need to be introduced. It only needs to be remembered. Your soul is older than your name. Older than this body. Older than every moment you think defines you. And deep down you know it, because there are places you've never been that still feel like home. There are people you've just met that feel like family. And there's a part of you that mourns something you were never told you lost. This is soul memory. Not the stories from this life, but the echoes of who you've always been and who you're here to become again. It stirs when you're still, when you're in nature, when you stare into the stars long enough to forget your own story and feel part of something infinite. This is what the Akashic Records hold. Not rules, not dogma, not history as written by victors, but the raw energy of remembrance. Your journey, not just from birth, but from beyond the veil. And if you felt it, that soft pulse behind the ordinary, that tug that says, this isn't your first time, then you're already accessing it. You don't need proof, you need presence, because your life isn't random, it's a continuation. And your awakening didn't start here. It started long ago, and it's just now beginning again. Long before the phrase Akashic Records was ever spoken, mystics were already reading from it. Prophets were already dreaming through it. And sages, in caves, deserts, temples, were already listening to a field beyond the mind. This wasn't fiction, it was frequency. The ancient Vedas of India first spoke of Akasha as the primordial ether, the subtle substance from which all things arise. Not air, not matter, but a sacred space in which sound, memory, and light move as one. In this ether, the rishis said, every deed, every thought, every soul imprint left a trace, like sound in a cave that never stopped echoing. Thousands of years later, seers across Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia spoke of something eerily similar. A book of life, a tablet of destiny, an invisible scroll containing all that was, is, and could be. In Kemet, this knowledge was guarded by the Neteru, divine intelligences who help the soul review its deeds before reincarnation. In Greece, philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato hinted at a soul memory, a place the soul visits between lives to choose its next path. But none of them claimed to invent it. They described what they experienced, what they remembered, what they entered. Medieval mystics in Christian monastic traditions called it the Book of God's Remembrance. In Sufi Islam, it was referred to as the Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet. The Jewish Kabbalists spoke of the Sefer HaChem, a book written with divine fire. All across cultures, the metaphor was the same. A living record, a cosmic ledger, a source that remembers you better than you remember yourself. When modern theosophists like Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner began using the term Akashic Records, they weren't discovering something new. They were giving language to something timeless, something humanity had already known, but been taught to forget. These records were never hidden. They were buried behind distraction, behind systems that taught you to look outward instead of inward, behind religions that told you to obey rather than remember. But the mystics, they never stopped listening, because the Akashic field doesn't require belief. It requires attunement, a quiet mind, an open heart, a readiness to surrender intellect for inner knowing. This isn't about learning something new. It's about peeling back the noise until the memory returns, because the records aren't somewhere else. They are the quiet between your thoughts, the breath before you speak, the vibration behind your name. You don't need credentials to access them. You don't need permission. You only need to remember how to listen. They're not fantasy. They're the foundation. And if so many across time describe the same field, with the same reverence, using different words but identical truths, then maybe they weren't deluded. Maybe they were in touch with something real. And maybe, so are you. Imagine a library with no walls, no shelves, no books, no language, and yet, somehow, it knows your every question before you ask it. It doesn't store information the way our minds do. It vibrates with knowing, like a song that plays only when your soul is ready to hear it. This is the Akashic field, a memory not kept in matter, but in energy. In the language of mysticism, it's a divine record. In the language of science, it behaves like a quantum field, an interdimensional database of light, thought, and potential. This is not a metaphor. Physicists like Erwin Laszlo have proposed that the Akashic field may be the foundational matrix beneath all reality, a sea of information that connects every particle, every life, every moment. It exists beyond time, beyond space, and even beyond the mind that tries to explain it. Which is why you can't enter it with logic. You can only align with it. The Akashic records don't live in a place. They are the place. They are the background intelligence of the universe, where past, present, and future collapse into now. This is why a healer in Peru, a monk in Tibet, and a mystic in New York can all access the same knowing, the same truth, without ever having met. It's not location, it's vibration. When you enter stillness, when you breathe into the heart and soften the intellect, the field becomes clearer, not louder, clearer, like a radio finely tuned to the right frequency. The records don't shout, they whisper, and they will not give you what your ego wants to hear. They will give you what your soul came here to remember. You may have already touched them without knowing it. That dream that spoke with perfect clarity, that voice that came during meditation, that sudden rush of understanding when you weren't even thinking. These weren't fantasies, they were flashes, soul contact through the quantum veil. And the more you trust them, the more they reveal. Because the records aren't a reward, they're a resonance. The deeper you align with truth, the more naturally you attune. And this is why some hear nothing, while others hear everything. It isn't about being chosen. It's about being ready, to listen without defense, to ask without agenda, to receive without expectation. This library is waiting, not above you, not outside you, but within the very field your soul is made of. And every moment you return to presence, you place your hands on its invisible pages again. It remembers you. And when you're still enough, you remember it too. You were never locked out of the records. You were taught to look everywhere but within. The truth is, the record keeper has always lived inside you. Not as a person, not as a guide in a robe with golden scrolls, but as the deepest layer of your own awareness. The silent witness that sees without judgment and remembers without effort. Your consciousness isn't just a receiver, it's a transmitter. Every thought, every word, every feeling you emit carries a vibrational signature. And that signature imprints onto the field. The same way sound ripples in water, the same way light leaves a trail. You're not just living your life, you're etching it into the Akasha. But you're also more than the pen. You're the reader. The ancient mystics taught that the human being is a microcosm of the entire cosmos, a fractal of divine intelligence. That means everything the records contain already lives in you. Your DNA is not just biological. It's a resonant code, an antenna for higher knowing. Scientists once called over 90% of it junk, not understanding that what couldn't be seen still carried potential. But mystics knew. They saw the soul as the original record keeper, and the heart as the gateway. The heart doesn't analyze, it listens. And when you enter it, truly enter, you don't read the records the way you read a book. You feel them. You remember. You dissolve the illusion of separation between you and the knowing. There is no subject and object, only merging. And in that merging, the answers come. Not because you force them, but because your readiness aligned with their truth. This is why no guru can give you access. Because the password isn't a word, it's a state. Stillness, sincerity. A willingness to meet your own soul in its rawest honesty. That's what unlocks the door. That's what brings the record keeper forward. You felt glimpses. That moment of déjà vu too vivid to dismiss. That flash of memory in meditation that didn't come from this life. That deep intuitive knowing that saved you. Or awakened something long asleep. These aren't anomalies. They are activations. Signs that the record keeper within you is stirring. And every time you choose presence over panic, stillness over noise, truth over comfort, you come closer. You are not a seeker. You are a rememberer, a reactivator, a soul that agreed to forget for a while. So the return would mean something. So trust the inner voice that whispers when the world is loud. Trust the sensations that make no logical sense but feel ancient. Trust the chills, the dreams, the moments of sudden clarity that seem to fall from nowhere. Because they're not from nowhere, they're from you. The deeper you go within, the clearer the records become, and the more you remember, the more the field opens. They couldn't burn the records, so they buried them beneath laughter. The strategy wasn't fire, it was ridicule. Turn truth into myth. And you don't need chains. You only need doubt. You only need to see the idea that it's foolish to believe. That's what happened to the Akashic Records. What was once revered as the soul's most sacred map became a joke in the mouths of the uninformed. Or worse, a curiosity for fiction. But long before the records were called Akashic, they were known by many names. The Egyptians spoke of the halls of Ma'at, the place where the heart is weighed, not just for judgment, but for resonance with truth. The Hindus knew of the Akasha, the fifth element, the subtle ether that stores vibration itself. The Tibetans guarded their book of space, a field of knowing that could be accessed beyond mind. The Greeks whispered of the anima mundi, the world soul that holds all memory. None of this was myth, It was knowledge, encoded in symbol. But then came empire, conquest, and control. And the first step in control is always disconnection from your history, from your divinity, from your memory. So they labeled it legend, allegory, imagination, Atlantis, fiction, Lemuria, fantasy, Akasha, occult nonsense. But deep down, you didn't believe them because you felt it. The records speak in dreams, in symbols, in moments of knowing you didn't earn in this lifetime. When you walk into a temple for the first time and weep. When you touch a page of a sacred book and feel your chest vibrate. When a stranger says a word you've never heard, but somehow you know it. That is not fantasy. That is retrieval. You are retrieving the very thing they buried. Not beneath ground, but beneath noise, beneath shame, beneath the idea that only what can be seen is real. But the ancients didn't believe that. They knew the most important things are invisible: love, time, breath, soul, memory. The Akashic field was the blueprint, not only of your life but of civilization. They used it to build temples aligned to stars, to chart destinies before birth, to guide healing by tuning the soul's original note. But they couldn't let that survive. Because if you remembered who you were before systems, before schooling, before religion, you wouldn't need them. So they taught you to roll your eyes, to dismiss what your ancestors knew. They wrapped your sacred birthright in fairy tales, but even fairy tales carry a signature. And when you hear the truth, even inside the myth, your body reacts, your spirit stirs, because some part of you has never forgotten. It's not about believing in fantasy. It's about remembering that the truth was always dressed in metaphor, not because it was false, but because it was too powerful to be left naked. And now, you're learning how to see through the veil again. They knew the truth couldn't be erased entirely, so they set it on fire, again and again, not just once, but across centuries, across empires, across continents. In Alexandria, the great library held scrolls from Egypt, Babylon, India, and beyond, thousands of years of wisdom, star maps, healing practices, codes of energy and sound, records of civilizations that rose and fell before known time. Some say Julius Caesar's troops torched it accidentally. Others say it was deliberate. Either way, it burned. And the fire wasn't just physical, it was a message. Knowledge this vast, this liberating, was dangerous to control systems. Because when you read words that resonate with your soul, you don't just learn, you remember. So they burned the texts. In China, during the Qin dynasty, books on metaphysics and history were outlawed. Scholars were executed. In Spain, the sacred Maya codices were destroyed by conquistadors who called them the work of demons. Only 3 survived, just 3. The pattern is unmistakable. Burn the wisdom, bury the voices, rewrite the narrative. What couldn't be incinerated was simply hidden, in vaults, monasteries, private collections. Secret teachings passed only to initiates. Mystery schools moved underground. Oral lineages whispered across bloodlines, disguised as folklore. But what they feared most wasn't the ink, it was the map. Because esoteric knowledge wasn't just about how the stars moved or how to align crystals. It was a blueprint, showing humanity how to access something empires couldn't control: inner authority. The texts taught that consciousness shapes reality, that vibration precedes matter, that love is a frequency, not just an emotion. This wasn't religion, it was technology. It taught you how to tune yourself, how to clear your field, activate your intuition, connect to the records without needing a gatekeeper. And that's what scared them. because control requires dependency, and awakened souls don't obey, they create. So the map had to go. But the Akashic Records can't be erased by fire, because they were never made of ink. They're stored in the ether, the fifth element, the space between, the silence under sound, the geometry beneath your skin. You carry the map in your bones, in your dreams, in the tingling behind your eyes when truth brushes too close. The real loss wasn't the libraries, it was the forgetting that came after. But the smoke has started to clear. You've begun to question the official stories. You felt the call to seek something deeper, something not taught, but remembered. And every time you light a candle, open a book, or enter a meditation with intention, you recover a piece of the buried map, one page at a time. And eventually, when enough souls remember how to read it, the fire becomes a beacon, not of destruction, but of return. There was a time when remembering who you were was sacred, when to speak of past lives was not strange, but expected, when children who spoke of other eras were seen as wise, not ill, when dreams were messages, not just fragments, when memory was a path back to the divine. But that time was dangerous to power, because if you remember who you've been, you stop being easy to control. You stop believing the story that this is your only life, that this system is all there is, that salvation must come from someone else's hands. And so, remembering became heresy. In 553 AD, the Second Council of Constantinople removed reincarnation from Christian doctrine, not by spiritual revelation, but political necessity. Emperor Justinian decreed it. His wife Theodora, a former actress turned empress, feared karma might expose her past, so they rewrote eternity. And suddenly, to remember was sin. To speak of other lifetimes was blasphemy. To know the soul was eternal became a punishable crime. The mystics were silenced. The seers became heretics. The sages went underground. Across continents, a quiet erasure began. Inquisition fires didn't just burn flesh. They burned the right to remember. Midwives were called witches. Healers were hunted. And those who saw too much or recalled too clearly were accused of consorting with darkness. But the darkness wasn't in the memories. It was in the fear of what those memories could awaken. Because when a soul begins to remember its true history, not the one written in textbooks, but the one etched in its energy field, something profound begins to stir. A rebellion that's not loud, not violent, but sovereign. You begin to live differently, speak differently. You stop chasing approval and start following alignment. You no longer fear death because you've done it before. You no longer obey blindly because you remember empires fall. You remember Atlantis. You remember Egypt. You remember lifetimes of rising and falling, healing and harming, forgetting and remembering. And that is the ultimate threat, because a soul that remembers cannot be owned. So systems built on obedience had to act. They weaponized forgetting. They institutionalized amnesia. And they labeled memory, sacred ancient memory, as madness. But the records never forget. And your soul never stop listening. That feeling you've had since you were young, that the world wasn't telling the whole truth. That something deep inside you knows more than it should. That wasn't imagination. That was leakage. Memory breaking through the cracks. You are not broken. You are awakening. And every time you remember a dream, or feel a place you've never been, or meet someone who feels familiar in your bones, you reclaim what they tried to steal. Your memory is not their property. It is your portal. And now, It's beginning to open. Long before books were bound and scriptures canonized, the secrets of the soul were passed in whispers, not to all, but to those who were ready. In the temples of ancient Egypt, the priesthood knew, not merely through faith, but through experience. Initiates of the temple of Dendera and Abydos were taught that memory was sacred and the soul's journey was cyclical. They read the stars not as symbols of fate, but as coordinates of return. They called it the halls of Amenti, the place where the soul travels between incarnations, where the records are stored in light. This was not myth, it was training. Egyptian high priests, like those who taught the young initiate, later known to Greece as Plato, weren't describing fantasy. They were guardians of remembrance. Every ritual, every chant, every glyph etched in stone was encoded with resonance. They weren't writing history, they were transmitting frequency. Across the Indus Valley, the Vedic seers, rishis, entered deep states of samadhi and emerged with cosmic truths. The Akasha was not theory, it was lived. To them, Akasha was the fifth element, the ether that holds vibration, memory, and possibility. The Rig Veda speaks of Chit, consciousness that records all things. They didn't seek knowledge, they remembered it. They believed that everything ever spoken, felt, or dreamed still resided in the cosmic fabric, and that one could tune into it, just as a musician tunes into a song that already exists. In the early years of Christianity, before the councils, before the empires, the Gnostics preserved a quieter gospel. They taught that the divine spark within each human was a fragment of the original mind. To awaken that spark, one had to pierce the veil of forgetfulness. The Akashic field wasn't mentioned by name, but it was known as memory, as gnosis, as living truth stored in the soul. The Gospel of Thomas whispers, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." It was not metaphor, it was map. Across oceans and deserts, in different languages and symbols, the same message was encoded. You are not separate. You are not new. You are remembering yourself through this form. The priests knew, and so did the mystics, and the dreamers, and the children who remembered things they were never taught. But truth that lives in whispers threatens power that rules through noise. So the temples were desecrated, the Gnostic texts buried in desert jars, the rishis ridiculed by empires that called themselves civilized. Yet none of it stopped the current, because this knowledge does not depend on paper, or titles, or permission. It is passed not just through teachings, but through soul contracts. That's why you're hearing this now. Somewhere in your timeline, you met them, in a dream, in a breath, in a silence that cracked open your memory. The priests, the seers, the record keepers, and they didn't teach you, they reminded you. You are not reading this for the first time, you are recognizing it, and that recognition is the beginning of return. There are dreams that don't feel like dreams. They leave you breathless, like you've just returned from somewhere real, somewhere familiar. Sometimes it's a face you've never met, but instantly trust. A city that doesn't exist, but you know every corner. A language you've never studied, but somehow understand. These aren't fantasies, they are retrievals, because the Akashic field doesn't just live above you, it threads through you. And when your body rests, your soul wanders, it remembers, it reaches, and the dreamscape becomes a doorway. Carl Jung called them archetypal dreams, messages from the collective unconscious, carrying symbols older than time. But mystics before him knew what science is still trying to grasp, that dreams are not hallucinations of the mind. They are messages from the field, fragments of your greater memory, encoded in metaphor, wrapped in story, but true nonetheless. This is why you sometimes wake up crying without knowing why, or smiling at someone who was never real, because your soul was speaking in its first language, energy, image, emotion. In the Vedic texts, dreams were considered one of the subtle paths to the Akasha. The Upanishads speak of the Swapna state, the dream world, as a legitimate dimension of the soul's journey, not fantasy, a classroom. The Tibetan Buddhists trained in dream yoga knew this well. They practiced becoming conscious within the dream, to access teachings hidden by waking logic. They didn't just analyze dreams, they entered them, guided by mantras, to recall truths lost in the daylight. And then there's déjà vu, that ripple in time that makes you pause. You've been here before, but not in this life. It's not glitch, it's recognition. Your soul briefly slips into sync with a moment it already lived, and in that sliver, memory surfaces, but only just enough to whisper, there is more to this than you think. Even visions, sudden flashes of insight, knowing, or memory, they are not accidents. They are transmissions, downloads from the Akashic field when your mind becomes still enough or desperate enough to finally listen. The reason these moments feel sacred is because they are, and the reason they're often dismissed, because they bypass intellect. They don't make sense to the conscious mind, because they weren't meant for the conscious mind. They are meant for the part of you that remembers how to feel truth, not debate it. So when you dream of flying, maybe you once did. When you dream of drowning, maybe you once were. When you feel you've met someone from before, maybe you have. And maybe it matters now, because your dreams aren't just stories. They are signals, and the more you honor them, the louder they become, until one day, waking and dreaming blur, and the record opens, even with your eyes wide open. Every moment, they pull you away from yourself. Another notification, another headline, another demand for your attention, your reaction, your time. It feels normal, but it's not. It's the matrix, not of machines, but of momentum. A system built not to imprison your body, but to exhaust your awareness, because stillness is dangerous. In stillness, you begin to see again. In silence, memory surfaces. And in presence, the veil thins, so they keep you spinning, from school to screen, from job to feed, from goal to goal to goal. You are praised for being productive, but punished for being present. And slowly, almost invisibly, the portal begins to close, not because it's locked, but because you forget it was ever open. The ancient mystics didn't fear technology. They feared distraction, because when your mind is flooded with noise, your soul's voice becomes a whisper, and eventually, even that whisper gets drowned. The Akashic field doesn't shout, it waits. But the ones who engineered this system, they knew that. They didn't need to destroy the records. They just needed to make you too busy to listen, too tired to remember. And so, they built a world that rewards speed, but devalues wisdom, that monetizes your gaze, but dulls your inner sight. Even spirituality became a market. Even healing became content. It's not that truth disappeared. It's that attention was hijacked. And here's the paradox. The more lost you feel in the external world, the closer you are to finding the internal one. Because the ache, the burnout, the feeling that none of this makes sense anymore, that is the friction of remembrance, the inner knowing that this isn't real, not in the way they taught you. The indigenous tribes knew this, the druids, the yogis, the desert prophets and sky watchers. They weren't running from the world, they were learning how to see through it. The Akashic field is not found in noise, it emerges when the noise fades. But that's exactly what they feared. Not your rebellion, your recollection. Because if enough of you remembered who you are, if enough of you stopped scrolling, comparing, chasing, and simply sat still long enough to hear the hum beneath the illusion, the whole thing would unravel. Because the power was never in the system. It was always in your sight, but only when that sight turned inward. And only when you remembered that silence is not emptiness, it is the doorway home. They told you intuition was unreliable, that it wasn't real unless it could be measured, that what couldn't be dissected didn't matter. But long before machines, there was memory. Before books, there was knowing. And before science, there was the soul. They called it logic, but it was a cage, because intuition couldn't be explained on a chalkboard. It couldn't be repeated in a lab. And so, it became dangerous, a threat to the control grid, a rebellion without a banner. So they rewrote the story. They taught you to doubt the sudden feeling in your gut, to dismiss the flash of knowing before words arrived, to ignore the sense that someone you love was just about to call. They made you ashamed of the sacred and replaced it with numbers, systems, labels, diagnoses. You began to feel things you couldn't explain, and they told you it was dysfunction. You saw patterns. They said it was coincidence. You felt energy. They said it was nonsense. You remembered dreams that felt more real than waking life, and they gave it a name in a manual. But here's what they never admitted. The Akashic Records speak in intuition. The field doesn't send text. It sends vibration. A sudden tear, a tingle on your skin, a moment of clarity that arrives in silence. That's the soul's language. That's the library's whisper. But they made it heresy, because if you trust your own inner compass, you stop needing their maps. And if you remember that knowing without evidence isn't madness, but memory, then their entire illusion cracks. Because intuition bypasses programming. It's ancient and sovereign and immune to control. This is why prophets were ridiculed, why mystics were exiled, why witches were burned, not for curses, but for clarity, for feeling what others were taught to ignore. But now, the tide is turning. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining it. You are remembering. The rise in anxiety, in disorders, in unexplainable emotion. It's not a mental health crisis. It's a soul retrieval. It's the Akashic field rising again, through the body, through the nervous system, through the frequency that doesn't need proof to be true. So breathe, let the logic tremble, let the knowing return, because in the end, it wasn't intuition that was dangerous. It was what might happen if you trusted it. They weren't burned for darkness. They were burned for light. The mystics, the sensitives, the seers, they saw too much. And what they saw couldn't be controlled. They spoke of visions, of voices not heard with ears, of truths not written in books, of timelines that curved and shimmered like water. They weren't broken, they were broadcasting, but to an empire that survives on blindness. Clairvoyance is treason, so they were ridiculed, not because they were wrong, but because they remembered, and memory in the wrong body becomes dangerous. They told you oracles were delusional, that mediums were frauds, that channelers were mentally ill. That intuition was a guess, never guidance, because if you believed them, you might start believing yourself. So they rewrote the script. They turned spiritual gifts into punchlines, mysticism into madness, and made the most sacred knowing look like superstition. It wasn't just censorship, it was strategy. Discredit the messenger, and you bury the message. The ancient seers of Delphi were once advisors to kings. The Vedic rishis mapped the cosmos without telescopes. Indigenous shamans guided entire communities through visions, not algorithms. They didn't need machines. They were the instrument. And their records weren't in ink. They were in energy. But as empires grew, the mystics became inconvenient, because if the people trusted the priestess, they might stop fearing the priest. So the narrative shifted. Mystics became madwomen, prophets became heretics, and the divine became woo-woo. But still, the current flowed beneath the surface. A grandmother's dream, a child who remembers their past life, an artist who paints what they've never seen. Proof wasn't in a paper, it was in the pattern. And now, those labeled too sensitive are awakening. Those who were once mocked are returning. You might feel it in your own life, the strange dreams you don't want to tell anyone, the goosebumps when you hear certain words, the inner knowing you can't explain, but also can't deny. That's not imagination, that's activation. Because the Akashic field never left. It waited, in the body, in the soul, in the whispers between thoughts. And the ones they laughed at, they were holding the key. Every time they closed their eyes, they opened the records. So if you've ever been called too much, if you've ever been told you're just being emotional, take it as confirmation. You were never meant to fit the system. You were sent to rewrite it. Once, there was no separation. The scientist was the mystic. The temple was the laboratory. And to study the stars was to study the soul. But something fractured. The mind began to split itself from the spirit. Knowledge was extracted from wisdom, and science forgot its source. It didn't start with malice. It started with fear. The fear of what can't be measured. The fear of what can't be proven. The fear of what cannot be seen, but is still felt. And so began the great exile. The sacred was evicted from the syllabus. The soul was dismissed as subjective, and the universe was downgraded from a living intelligence to a cold machine. They called it progress, but it was really amnesia. Newton gave us gravity, but forgot the grace that holds it all together. Descartes divided body and mind, and called it clarity. And slowly, mystery became the enemy. Anything that couldn't be dissected was denied. Anything that couldn't be monetized was mocked. And the whispers of the cosmos were silenced beneath equations. But not completely, because spirit doesn't die, it waits. And now, it's re-emerging. In the quantum field, in the space between atoms, in the knowing that matter itself is made of memory. Modern physics is beginning to remember what the ancients always knew, that consciousness affects outcome, that intention shapes reality, that observation collapses the wave. They're rediscovering what the mystics wrote in silence. The Akashic Records were never separate from science. They are the blueprint behind it, the geometry beneath form, the code behind light. It was never a question of either or. It was always both particle and wave, both sacred and structured, both analytical and infinite, But that truth was dangerous because it empowers. A society rooted in spiritual science can't be controlled. It can't be ruled by fear. It doesn't look to authorities. It listens within. So the divide had to be enforced. Taught in schools, preached in pulpits, marketed in headlines. But now, the edges are fraying. More scientists are speaking in reverent tones. More doctors are studying energy. More seekers are bridging the realms. Because deep down, we know. We know that a heart emits an electromagnetic field. We know that trauma lives in the cells. We know that meditation changes brainwaves, hormones, and destiny. And we know that the records aren't in the sky. They're in the field. And the field is everywhere. So if you feel torn between intellect and intuition, between knowledge and knowing, you're not broken. You're remembering the unity that came before the split. And every time you choose both, you heal the fracture. You become the bridge, not just between science and spirit, but between who we were and who we're becoming. There was a time when intuition was law, when the rhythms of the moon were more important than the ticking of clocks, when a whisper carried more weight than a decree. And at the center of this wisdom stood the sacred feminine. Not just women, but the frequency of the feminine. Receptive, fluid, deeply knowing without needing to explain. This was the original pathway to the records. Because the Akashic field does not open to force, it opens to presence, to feeling, to surrender, but in a world shifting toward conquest and control. That was a problem. So they silenced her. Not just the women who held the ancient songs, but the archetype that lived in everyone. They burned the healers, shamed the dreamers, labeled the intuitive as mad or weak, and they replaced the inner compass with commandments, replaced soul wisdom with systems, replaced knowing with obedience. It wasn't just misogyny, it was strategic, because to access the records, truly access them, you must feel. You must trust what can't be proved. You must lean into the invisible. And that terrified them, because the feminine awakens sovereignty. It doesn't ask for permission, it remembers. And remembering is the greatest threat to any empire built on amnesia. So the feminine was fractured, split into roles, ridiculed in stories, exiled from temples. But she never vanished. She became the pause in your breath, the ache in your chest when you know something, but can't explain why. The tears that rise when a truth is too deep for words. She became the doorway, and now she is returning. Not just in women, but in all who are learning to listen again, to feel again, to allow again. Because the Akashic field is not a database. It's a womb, a place of gestation, of quiet truths and sacred echoes. And every time you slow down, every time you stop reaching and start receiving, you step closer to her, to yourself. The sacred feminine doesn't speak in facts. She speaks in symbols, in dreams, in synchronicities, in silence that somehow says everything. And she wants you to remember that power is not always loud, that truth is not always linear, and that the deepest wisdom lives where logic dares not go. This return is not about gender, it's about energy. And it's happening now, in you, in this breath, in the way you soften, even as the world tells you to harden. Because the records were never lost. They were only waiting for the ones who could feel again. And you're here, which means it's time. The field was never closed. Not when the temples fell, not when the scrolls were burned, not when your memories went dark, because truth doesn't disappear, it waits. The Akashic field is not a myth. It's a living presence, a frequency woven into the fabric of reality, just beneath the noise. It has no beginning, no end. It doesn't age, doesn't rust, doesn't fade. It records, silently, faithfully, every breath, every choice, every thought. But unlike the systems of man, it doesn't judge. It reflects, it mirrors, it remembers who you were and who you came here to become. Across lifetimes, across veils, across timelines you don't yet recall, but have always shaped you. This field is not accessed by force or formula. You cannot hack your way in. You feel your way back. Stillness becomes the key, and frequency becomes the map. Modern science brushes against it now. Quantum physicists speak of the zero-point field, of entangled particles communicating across galaxies, of data stored in the very spin of atoms. Mystics called it the mind of God, the infinite library, the book of life, different names, same truth, a sacred memory field, alive, aware, and waiting. When you feel that chill run down your spine, when a word, a dream, a scent opens something ancient inside you, that's not imagination, that's contact. The field is still speaking, but it will not shout over your distractions. It speaks in whispers, in frequencies, in subtle codes that only the still-hearted can hear. You don't need to believe, you only need to quiet, and you'll feel it, like a gentle pull, like a magnetic truth humming just beneath your skin. The records are not separate from you. They are not hidden in a cloud above the sky. They are embedded in the fabric of space and in the breath of your own soul. Because you are part of the field, you always were. The same energy that writes the records pulses in your cells. The same current that stores truth flows through your hands. You don't read the records, you resonate with them. And the more you align with your true frequency, the clearer they become. This is why awakening hurts, because as you rise, you remember. And as you remember, the illusions lose their grip. You were never disconnected, only distracted. The field is not gone. It's right here, right now, alive, waiting. And when you listen, really listen, you'll hear what was always speaking, your soul, your story, your truth. And it's time to remember, because the field never forgot. You were never just thinking, you were remembering. That sudden knowing, that flash of insight that arrives uninvited, fully formed, without explanation. A truth you feel in your bones before your mind can catch up. That's not imagination, it's not fantasy, and it's not coincidence. It's claircognizance, the clear knowing, a sacred ability, a soul retrieval. In the ancient temples, they didn't question these flashes. They honored them. The oracle at Delphi, the Egyptian priestess in trance, the Vedic rishi in stillness, each accessing the same timeless well, not through books, but through direct contact with the field. Claircognizance isn't taught, it's remembered, because you've used it before, in lives you don't recall but still carry. As a seer, a guide, a healer, you tune to the records like a musician to a divine frequency. Now, in this life, it returns, a whisper in the middle of your day, a certainty with no source, a knowing that needs no proof. But the world taught you to doubt it, to explain it away, to bury it beneath logic and facts and formulas. That was the plan, because if you trusted it, truly trusted it, you'd remember who you are. You are not just a thinker. You are a receiver, a transmitter, a living antenna for divine data. Science is catching up. Neuroscientists now speak of non-local consciousness, of downloads that defy linear cause, of intuition guiding decisions faster than thought. But the mystics have always known. Truth doesn't need time. It travels on resonance. And when you align with your soul's truth, it arrives. Your knowing is a signal. It's the field speaking back to you. The Akashic Records don't always appear in visions or dreams. Sometimes they arrive as a sudden certainty, a moment of, I just know this, because you've lived it before, because the code is already within you. And when you stop questioning your knowing, when you honor it, nurture it, act on it, you become dangerous to illusion, because you no longer need permission. You no longer need outside validation. You are accessing divine memory directly, clearly, immediately. This is the return of the inner temple, where no priest, no guru, no gatekeeper stands between you and source. Only your own willingness to listen. So the next time it happens, the next time you know something before you should, don't doubt it. Don't dismiss it. Pause, breathe, honor it, because you're not losing your mind. You're finding your soul, and the records are speaking again through you. There are moments when the air feels thinner, when time stretches, and reality seems to shimmer just at the edges. You feel it in your chest, in your skin, in that quiet place behind your thoughts. These are the thresholds, the moments when the veil thins and memory returns. Not the memory of this life, but of many, the soul's memory, the record beneath the record. It happens when you least expect it, during deep meditation, or while walking alone under the full moon's light, in sacred places that hold ancient frequencies, or in the silence just before sleep. You suddenly remember something you never learned, or see a place you've never visited, but somehow you know every corner. These are not tricks of the mind. They are reminders, glimpses through the thinning veil, equinoxes, solstices, eclipses. These celestial alignments have always been honored, not just for their light or shadow, but for what they open. During these times, the electromagnetic field of Earth shifts, and so does yours. The pineal gland, the ancient seat of inner vision, becomes more active. Your intuition sharpens, dreams become more vivid, and the records closer. Certain lands remember too, the Andes, the Himalayas, the pyramids of Giza, stone circles of Britain, temples of Angkor. These places weren't built randomly. They were portals, anchors, points where earth and sky spoke in harmony, and the veil grew thin. But you don't need to travel, because the veil also thins within you, in heartbreak, in stillness, in awe. When you hold your newborn child, when you lose someone and feel their presence after they're gone, when the noise of the world finally fades and your breath becomes the only sound, that's when you hear it, that soft recognition, the feeling of being in two worlds at once, here and elsewhere. You are not imagining this, you are remembering. And when the veil thins, when the soul's eyes blink open, you are invited into something ancient, something vast. The Akashic Records are not behind a locked door. They are right here, always pulsing, always present, waiting for the moment you slow down enough to listen. The veil is not there to punish you. It's a teacher. It teaches you to be still, to be present, to be ready. Because when you finally are, when you no longer chase the light, but become still enough to feel it, the veil parts, and what was hidden becomes home. not outside of you, but inside, because the door was never locked. You just forgot that you are the key. They are not figments, not inventions of imagination. The beings you feel around you in moments of deep stillness, the ones who show up in dreams, in visions, in déjà vu, they are the gatekeepers, not owners of the Akashic Records, but guardians of the current. They don't speak in words, they speak in recognition, in that inner nod you feel when something rings true, that soft, radiant silence that follows a deep knowing. Because the Akashic field, by its very nature, is protected by frequency. And these guides don't guard it with force. They guard it with vibration. When your heart is closed, when your motives are rooted in ego, you are locked out, not by punishment, but by resonance. The records cannot be accessed through fear, manipulation, or control. Only alignment unlocks them, only presence, only reverence. Some gatekeepers are your ancestors, those who lived, remembered, and crossed over holding pieces of the code. They stay close, not to interfere, but to whisper the parts of your story you forgot. Others are beings not of this earth. Old intelligences who've walked the spiral path long before humanity. They are stewards of the field, holding the integrity of the records beyond the distortion of time. In ancient mystery schools, initiates were taught to commune with these beings, to enter trance, still the mind, and journey into symbolic landscapes, where the gatekeepers would appear, often cloaked in symbols, animals, or light. The Book of Enoch describes watchers, those who hold knowledge between heaven and earth. Indigenous traditions speak of star ancestors and dream walkers. Gnostics referred to aeons, divine intermediaries between source and soul. All these lineages point to the same truth. You were never meant to walk alone. But here's the sacred paradox. The gatekeepers are not separate from you. They are the parts of you that remain awake in higher realms. Fragments of your own soul, echoing through dimensions, guiding your return. They appear when you're ready, when your intention is clean, when your vibration matches the truth you seek. So if the records ever feel far away, if the silence stretches too long, or the answers don't come, know this: it's not denial, it's protection. The field is always listening, but it responds to resonance. You don't earn access, you remember how to receive it. And the gatekeepers, they've been waiting. You're not waiting for permission, you never were. No one outside you can unlock the Akashic field, because access is not granted from above. It is remembered from within. The old systems taught you to seek approval from priests, from teachers, from sacred texts. They said you had to earn your way into the mystery. But the soul does not operate by hierarchy. It operates by harmony. The Akashic Records respond to vibration, to intention, to coherence. When your heart, your breath, and your presence align, you resonate with the frequency of remembrance. That's the key. Not dogma, not degrees, not a lineage written in stone, but a signature written in your energy. This is why mystics throughout time, even those separated by continents and centuries, describe the same phenomenon, the same sacred knowing. They entered temples not made of stone, but of stillness. They opened books with no pages, but infinite memory. The Sufis spun, not to escape, but to align. The Taoists sat in silence until the world dissolved. The shamans drummed to sync the heart with the cosmos. All of them, tuning. Not to be worthy, but to remember. This is what modern minds often forget. The records are not a vault you break into. They are a mirror you become clear enough to see through. And that's why it sometimes feels far away. Not because you're unworthy, but because your signal is cloudy. The noise of the world has layered static on your frequency. But when you breathe, when you come into now, the veil softens. It is not authority that opens the door. It's presence. The moment you stop trying to access it and start embodying truth, you're in. This is why those with open hearts can receive more than those with libraries of knowledge. It's not about what you know. It's about who you are. That's the sacred design. To protect the power from misuse, to ensure only those in resonance can dance in the current of the infinite. So if you felt the record stir inside you, if the idea of them brings tears, goosebumps, or longing, you're not imagining it. You're not trying to gain access. You're remembering that you never lost it. You just forgot how to listen. And now, you're tuning again. You were never meant to find the records in a dusty book or through someone else's words. The true Akashic record isn't outside of you. It's etched into your soul. Every moment you've lived, every breath you've taken, every lesson you've stumbled through or surrendered to, it's all there. Not just stored, but alive, waiting, whispering. You felt it, haven't you? In the still moments when the noise falls away, when you sit with your breath long enough and something begins to stir. It's not a memory from this life, but from something much older. A sense, a knowing, a recognition without evidence. That's the record calling you back. Reading your soul story is not about effort. It's about alignment. Not about achievement, but allowing. The records do not respond to force. They respond to frequency, to sincerity, to presence. This is not a transaction. It's a reunion. You begin by listening. Not with your ears, but with your entire being. Through meditation, through stillness, through dreams, through the way your body reacts when you read a sacred text, or hear a word that shivers your spine. That moment of resonance, that's a sentence from your own book. You don't have to go anywhere. You just have to become still enough to receive. Some say you need permission, that only trained initiates or ordained readers can access the field, but that was the great deception. The field does not discriminate. It recognizes truth. It opens not to authority, but to authenticity. When your intention is clear, when your heart is anchored in humility, the doors begin to open. There are no literal pages, but there are patterns, energetic imprints, sequences of vibration that tell the story of who you've been and what your soul longs to become. You may see symbols, hear phrases, receive images or sensations. Don't dismiss them. Don't analyze them to death. Let them arrive as they are. Raw, beautiful, incomplete. They will make sense later when the heart is ready. And when it comes, it won't feel like discovery. It will feel like recognition. A moment where the breath stills, the body relaxes, and the soul sighs, yes, this is mine. I wrote this. I remember. You don't need a guide. You are the guide. The record was never lost, only buried under doubt and distraction. And now, the layers are thinning. Trust what returns, even if it defies logic, even if it makes no sense to the rational mind. Because the Akashic records are not accessed by intellect, they're accessed by vibration. And every time you sit in stillness, speak your truth, or follow the tug of intuition, you're turning the pages. The story isn't finished, but you're already holding the pen. And it begins again, right here, in this breath, In this remembering, you are never the only author. The Akashic Record isn't just the story of you, it's the story of us. It holds the thread of every soul, every lineage, every breath exchange between the seen and unseen, every war and every healing, every betrayal and every forgiveness, every heartbeat that ever echoed across time. It's all there, interwoven, interlinked. When you access your records, you are not just touching your own past, you're brushing the edges of a collective tapestry, a soul memory larger than the individual, larger than the name you wear in this lifetime. That's why the visions sometimes come with faces you don't recognize, emotions you can't explain, pain that isn't entirely yours, but still lives in your bones. Because memory isn't isolated, it's entangled. You carry your ancestors, not just in blood, but in frequency, in echoes, in dreams that speak in unfamiliar languages, in reactions that don't belong to your own lifetime. That sudden fear, that irrational guilt, that inexplicable yearning for a land you've never visited. These are not coincidences. They are transmissions, threads from the past asking to be seen, felt, and finally healed. You are not just remembering for yourself, you are remembering through yourself. For those who couldn't, for those who were silenced, burned, forgotten, you are the voice they never had, the breath they never finished, the completion of a loop that began long before your birth. And you don't have to carry it all, but you do have to honor it. That's the gift of the records and the responsibility. When you retrieve memory, you retrieve power. And when you retrieve pain, you're given the choice to transform it. Not through denial, but through presence, through sacred witnessing. There are wounds in the Akasha, collective traumas that echo across generations. Slavery, war, colonization, loss. And the field holds them all, not to punish us, but to free us, to give us access to the roots of our disconnection so we can reclaim wholeness. You are not a mistake. Your birth was not random. Your placement in this time, this family, this body was intentional, because your soul carried a frequency capable of remembering something others could not. And in remembering, you don't just liberate yourself, you shift the entire grid. This is not about burden, it's about power. Because when you open your record with sincerity, what rises may not be a personal story, but a collective one. And the Akashic field will show you exactly what needs to be seen. Not what flatters the ego, but what heals the soul. And through that process, the story becomes new. You are not just the reader, you are the rewriter. And through you, the broken becomes beautiful, the forgotten becomes sacred, and the silence becomes song again. Time is the illusion that keeps the soul in a straitjacket. In the Akashic field, there is no past, no future, no linear thread guiding the narrative of your life from beginning to end. Everything is now. Everything is happening all at once. And what you call memory is really alignment. You are not the sum of your past lives. You are the presence of all of them, right here, right now, playing out in simultaneous strands across the vast, multi-dimensional web of consciousness. That's why sometimes you meet someone and feel lifetimes pass between you in an instant. Or why places feel hauntingly familiar before you've ever stepped foot there. It's not your imagination. It's the echo of the soul moving across planes. In the Akasha, your soul contracts. The agreements you made before incarnating are not hidden scrolls locked in some cosmic vault. They're frequencies, fields of choice and intention, each one a sacred chord in the larger symphony of your evolution. Some were made in love, some in pain, but all were made with purpose. Even those who hurt you may have once been your allies in other realms, playing a role to help awaken you. Even those you love deeply may not be new at all, but ancient companions walking beside you again across the spiral of time. And karma, it's not a punishment, it's a rhythm, a feedback loop of energy, a soul's own signature reflecting back what still needs to be understood, forgiven, or integrated, not just from a past life, but from another version of you that exists right now, in another thread of the infinite web. So when you face a pattern that feels impossible to break, it may not belong to the you in this body. It may be resonating from another timeline where the choice was never made, or the pain was never healed. The records don't just show you what was, they show you what is, across realms, across identities, across incarnations. You are 1,000 selves woven into one radiant now, and each breath is a portal, each still moment a bridge between lifetimes. That's why meditation opens the field. That's why presence is power, because to be truly here is to be everywhere. The Akashic field doesn't need you to remember the names of your former selves. It needs you to feel them, to welcome them, to listen, because their stories are still unfolding. And through you, their unfinished chapters may find completion. And when you step into alignment with your higher self, the one that's always been watching, guiding, waiting, something extraordinary happens. Timelines collapse, loops close, and you begin to feel it, that you've already been here, that you've already chosen this, and that the soul, your soul, is not traveling toward destiny. It's returning to it. Not all questions are created equal. In the Akashic field, what you ask is a reflection of what you're ready to receive. The records do not answer curiosity for the sake of knowing. They respond to longing, to the quiet ache within the soul that seeks not just information, but transformation. The doors don't open for trivia, they open for truth. And the most powerful questions are never loud. They're whispered, felt, carried for years before they're spoken aloud. Questions like, why did my soul choose this? What pattern am I here to finally end? What am I not seeing that my soul already knows? These are not just queries, they're keys. Because when you ask with reverence, with the intent to awaken, not to control, the records don't just answer, they sing. They ripple through your body with resonance that no intellectual logic can replicate. You don't hear the answer, you become it. And sometimes, the real answer is the question itself. The act of asking can shift your frequency, realign your timeline, change your life. So ask not for prediction, but for permission to see. Ask to remember, ask to realign, ask to release what you no longer need to carry. Ask not, will I succeed, but what's ready to rise within me. Not, will they return, but what does my soul still need to learn through this love? Because your soul already knows, but it's waiting for you to ask in a way that moves energy, not just thoughts. The field isn't interested in performance, it's listening for sincerity, for readiness, for the moment your ego loosens its grip, and your inner child, your soul, your true self, finally steps forward with open hands and an honest heart. And when that happens, the veil thins, the records stir, and sometimes the answer doesn't come in words at all. It comes in dreams, in symbols, in the quiet nudge that changes everything. That's why you must ask with spaciousness, not to demand, but to invoke, not to confirm what you already believe, but to surrender what you thought you knew. Because the records aren't here to reinforce your story. They're here to rewrite it. From a place of love, truth, and highest alignment. And remember this always. The most powerful question you can ever ask the Akasha is this: what part of me is ready to come home? And then listen, not with your mind, but with your whole being, because the records are alive. And when you ask with intention, they answer in ways that will rearrange your soul. The Akashic Records aren't just written in the stars. They're etched into your skin, your spine, your breath. Your body is not separate from the field. It is the field made tangible, made touchable. It is the living scroll, the walking library, the oracle that remembers long before the mind catches up. Every shiver of intuition, every sudden tear, every ache that seems to echo something older than this life. It's all communication. Your nervous system isn't just reacting to this moment. It's decoding memory, ancestral, soul level, timeless. Because trauma doesn't just live in the past. It lives in tissue. And so does truth. That tightness in your chest when you walk into certain places. It might be a forgotten vow resurfacing. That tingling in your hands when you meet someone's eyes. It could be a reunion lifetimes in the making. That weight in your belly during meditation. That's the soul turning a page, asking you to listen, not with logic, but with presence. The Akashic field speaks through sensation, through breath, through silence, because before there was language, there was the body, and it remembers. Your spine is a staff of wisdom, your breath is a bridge, your heartbeat a sacred drum that echoes the rhythm of lifetimes, and your gut is ancient. It was never just about digestion. It's a compass, magnetic, electric, divine. The more you regulate your nervous system, not numb it, the clearer the signal becomes. Stillness doesn't mean silence, it means attunement. When you learn to sit with sensation, not run from it, you unlock a portal deeper than any external ceremony. Because the temple was never just out there. It's the way your breath shifts when you hear a forgotten truth. The way your skin tingles when alignment arrives. The way your entire body lights up when soul memory touches the now. You don't need to go anywhere to access the records. You just need to go inward. The Akashic field is accessed not through effort, but through embodiment. Through the sacred awareness that your body isn't an obstacle to the divine. It's the gateway. Your healing is not a detour, it's the path. And your sensations are not interruptions, they're messages. Start asking your body what it knows. Ask the tightness what it remembers. Ask the tears what they're releasing. Ask the stillness what it's holding. And then listen, because the soul writes, but the body sings. And if you quiet the noise, return to the breath, and honor your vessel as the sacred technology that it is, you'll begin to hear the song again. The records were never just above you, they've always been within. Something is happening, quietly, globally, all at once. People are waking up, not just to who they are, but to what they're capable of. And among them, a particular kind of awakening is emerging. One that's subtle, but unmistakable. The rise of the soul reader. They don't wear robes, they don't sit in temples. Most of the time, they're ordinary people with extraordinary sensitivity. Nurses, artists, teachers, empaths, healers. And one day, something shifts. A question enters their heart like a bell. A sensation flickers that they've read this before. A dream turns into a transmission. A stranger's story feels like it's already written in their hands. They begin to access the records, not through books, but through resonance, through deep presence, through the ancient remembering that what they're tuning into has always been inside them. Because the Akashic field isn't a place you go. It's a frequency you feel. And more people are starting to feel it. It starts small. An image during meditation. A sudden knowing when someone speaks. A vision that arrives before the mind can explain. And then, the mind begins to catch up. You realize you're not just sensing emotion. You're reading timelines, patterns, soul truths. Stories that don't belong to this life alone. These aren't psychic powers. They're human capacities, dormant, buried, but never broken. The rise of the soul reader is not about hierarchy. It's about remembering. It's not about someone being chosen. It's about someone choosing to listen. And when you do, when you drop beneath the noise, past the conditioning, and into the presence of the records, the field starts to speak back. You begin to understand symbols before they're explained. You begin to trust your intuition more than the world's logic. You begin to see that every person, every soul is a living chapter. And you're reading not with your eyes, but with your being. And you're not alone. All over the world, thousands are awakening to this same pulse. Some call it soul work. Some call it channeling. Some call it intuitive healing, regression therapy, vibrational tuning, multidimensional resonance. But all of them, whether they know it or not, are touching the Akasha. They're restoring a practice as old as time. They're doing what the ancient priestesses did in the temples, what the mystics did in caves, what the prophets did in trance. They are remembering. And here's the most powerful truth of all. If you feel this stirring in your own heart, if you felt truths arrive before you had words for them, you're not imagining things. You're already reading the records. You just haven't called it that yet. And now that you've remembered, it will only get clearer. The rise of the soul reader has already begun. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of them. Because deep down, you've always known. You've been told to look outside, to go find the teacher, the temple, the text, to seek access through rituals or gurus or complex systems. But what if the gateway was never out there? What if the most powerful portal to the Akashic Records was your life? Not the polished version, not the one you show the world, the raw one, the painful one, the beautiful one, the version full of contradictions, heartbreaks, longings, and quiet moments of wonder. Because every moment you've lived, every choice, every fear, every pattern is encoded with soul memory. And every emotion you've ever felt has been a guidepost. They weren't just feelings, they were keys. That anger, it might be tied to a vow your soul made lifetimes ago. That ache of longing, it could be the echo of a sacred mission still waiting to be fulfilled. The déjà vu, the instant connections, the repeating wounds. They're not just coincidences, they're threads, invitations, coordinates from the soul. Your life is the living library, and the more present you become with it, not resisting, not numbing, but witnessing, the more those pages start to turn. This is why stillness matters. This is why presence matters. Because when you drop into now, the noise clears and the signals rise. You start to hear what's underneath the chaos. You begin to feel the deeper story, the one that was never lost, only buried. Even your body holds records. Your breath, your skin, your nervous system. They remember everything. The trauma, yes, but also the ceremonies, the power, the initiations. Somatic echoes of who you were long before you had a name. And the soul is always nudging you back to it. Every moment of contrast in your life, every pattern that loops, every lesson that repeats, is not punishment. It's pattern recognition. It's the records rising up through the mess to say, Look here. Read this again. Your life is not random. It's the access point. And when you start to read it like a text, not judging it, but interpreting it with reverence, you awaken the field. You don't need to leave your life to touch the Akasha. You just need to be fully in it, to feel it, to sit with it, to love it. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because that's where the richest ink is written. That's where the ancient codes rise. Not in escape, but in embodiment. So if you've been wondering where to begin, the answer is simple. Start here. Start with your life. It's the portal you've been searching for, and it's been waiting for you to open it. You didn't stumble here by chance. You were called. There are moments in a soul's journey that feel small on the surface. A click, a video, a phrase that catches your breath. But beneath them, something ancient stirs. A door opens. And what looks like coincidence is actually coordination, across lifetimes. The Akashic Records are not just dusty scrolls in some etheric library. They are living currents of memory, imprinted in frequency, vibrating through your choices, your questions, and your timing. They are encoded not just in what you seek, but when you seek it. And if you're hearing these words now, it means something deeper inside you is ready, not just to learn, but to remember. You've likely felt it before, that strange recognition, that echo in the bones, that sense that you're reading something you never studied, but somehow already knew. That's not imagination, that's alignment. Because this message, this very moment, it's not random, it's a retrieval. When your soul planned this life, it left markers, clues, signs, triggers to wake you up when the illusion became too heavy. Certain people, certain dreams, certain breakdowns, and yes, even certain videos. This isn't a video, it's a mirror. And when you looked into it, something looked back, not from outside of you, but from within. A self that never forgot, a self that's been whispering, waiting, and writing every moment into your field, just waiting for the conscious you to catch up. There are pages in the Akashic Records that are only activated once the reader arrives in the right vibration. Some chapters can only be read through tears, others through silence. But the most sacred ones, they appear as life itself, a heartbreak, a reunion, a truth that hits so hard you forget to breathe. This moment is one of those. You weren't meant to find this before, and you weren't meant to find it later. It had to be now, because now your field is open. Now your frequency is receptive, and now your soul is signaling that it's time to turn the page. Let that land. Your curiosity was never aimless. Your questions were never foolish. They were sacred breadcrumbs leading you back to the library that lives inside you. You don't need to knock on a temple door to find it. You don't need permission from a priest to open it. You just needed a mirror. And here it is. Take a breath. You're already reading, not with your eyes, but with your essence. And the Akashic field is responding. Because this chapter wasn't written for you. It was written by you. And the next one is waiting. You've been taught to look up, to search for answers in the sky, in a robe, in a title, to believe that someone else knows the way, that if you could just find the right teacher, the right healer, the right guru, then maybe you'd be whole again. But the Akashic Records don't live in someone else's mouth. They live in the quietest part of you, the part no one can market, manipulate, or manufacture. Silence has always been the doorway. Not silence as absence, but silence as presence. There is a sacred stillness that hums beneath thought, beneath emotion, beneath the noise of the world and the stories you were given. In that stillness, the field speaks, not in words, but in waves. And if you're always looking outward, you'll miss the one voice that never left your side, your own. The most powerful readers of the Akasha were not loud. They were not famous. They were not worshipped. They were attuned. You don't need more information. You need reverence. Reverence for the subtle. Reverence for the signals that come not with flashing lights, but with goosebumps. Reverence for the gentle knowing that arises not when you're told what to believe, but when you remember what you've always known. The age of the guru is dissolving, not because the wisdom wasn't real, but because it was never meant to be outsourced. They carried the torch, yes, but the fire was always yours. Listen to the ache beneath your questions. Listen to the pull you feel when something aligns, even when it makes no logical sense. Listen to the moment your breath pauses, because a phrase, a memory, or a dream just unlocked something you didn't even know was locked. That is your soul speaking. And it doesn't need a translator. Yes, there are mentors. Yes, there are guides. But the moment they ask you to follow instead of feel, the moment they become a substitute for your inner compass, the connection is broken. Because true remembrance doesn't happen through obedience, it happens through resonance. You were designed to hear this field, not just to read it, but to feel it. The Akashic Records don't respond to hierarchy. They respond to harmony. You don't need credentials to access truth. You need courage to be still. You need trust to go inward. And you need faith, not in a person, but in the whisper inside you that has always known the way home. Because the record is already open, and the pen is already in your hand. Are you ready to write what comes next? You've been searching for something ancient, a forgotten book, a hidden vault, a sacred library buried under dust and time. But the truth is, the book was never lost, because the book is you. Every breath you've ever taken, every choice you didn't understand, every dream that left an imprint on your skin, every heartbreak that cracked you open just enough to let the light through. It was all part of the script, a record, a scroll written in silence, in stardust, in the language of your own soul. They told you to look outside for meaning, for validation, for the right doctrine, the right philosophy, the right permission slip to believe in your own knowing. But the Akasha doesn't live in temples made by hands. It lives in the way your chest tightens when truth is near, in the way your skin shivers when a forgotten memory returns, in the way your heart races when you realize you've been here before, not just in this life, but across the infinite spiral of time. You are not visiting the records. You are the records. Encoded in your DNA is every prayer ever whispered in the dark, every vow you made to return, every lifetime you've spent walking toward this moment, even when you forgot why. And now, you're remembering, not because someone told you, but because something sacred stirred when you heard these words, a vibration, a signal, a recognition. You didn't stumble on this video by accident. It's not just a piece of content. It's a breadcrumb, a mirror, a page in your own book. And the reason it feels so familiar is because you wrote it. The records are not a gift given to the few. They are a birthright returned to the many. And that birthright is awakening, not through noise, but through stillness. Not through striving, but through surrender. Not through logic, but through presence. So let this be your invitation, not to believe, but to remember. To remember the power of silence, the intelligence of the body, the wisdom that doesn't arrive in thoughts, but in frequency. To remember that you don't need to be chosen. You already were. You chose yourself the moment you opened your eyes in this lifetime and began the sacred task of remembering what you never truly forgot. You are the reader, you are the writer, you are the record, and you've only just begun to turn the page. If this stirred something ancient within you, something you can't quite name, but you feel it, then this isn't just a video, it's a remembering. So don't let it end here. Let this moment ripple. Let this frequency echo. Share it with someone you love. Comment below. Let us know what awakened in you. Subscribe if your soul whispered yes. And like this video if your heart said, finally, because you didn't find this by accident. You answered the call, and you're not alone anymore. This is a community of seekers, sensitives, and soul travelers, all on the same path of remembering. Welcome to the Hidden Voyage. Welcome home, Soul Whisper and Soul Creator. The Hidden Voyage. If this journey moves something in you, don't let it end in silence. Let it echo. Share it with someone still afraid to speak of death, still avoiding the mirror, still pretending time is infinite. Let this video be the hand you extend, the torch you pass, the doorway they didn't know they were seeking. Leave a comment, not just to speak, but to witness. What part of you is beginning to awaken? What have you been avoiding that now asks to be seen? And if your soul feels ready to keep walking, deeper, quieter, truer, then this is your place. Not just a channel, but a temple. Subscribe and join a circle of seekers who no longer run from the end because they've begun to live from it. We release these videos like offerings, each one a prayer, each one a mirror, each one a map to awaken before the end, to remember who you are beneath the name, to walk together toward what cannot die, one breath at a time, one truth at a time, one sacred step on the hidden voyage. Soul Whisper and Soul Creator. The Hidden Voyage.